Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I am the actor.
My name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Do you want to know why I said it like that this time?
Why?
Because I was listening to the podcast on YouTube and they closed caption it.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I say that, it sounds like I'm saying actor in engineer.
Huh.
And it's disturbing because it's every single podcast. So.
Oh, well, YouTube just needs to get better.
That and my diction needs to get better too. Anyway, and here we go.
So we now live in a world where Parasite is the Best Picture award winner from the Academy Awards. It is official. Somebody thought that it was good. So imagine that. We've been saying it for months now.
I just wish there were words. I just can't figure out how to express what I felt. What I felt was finally they got it right. Not finally, but they got it right. Mm. It felt that way. Everybody said that. And now I can out myself because I was saying very politely that if anything else won, that I would be okay with it because it's a great list of films this year. That was sort of true. I would have worked my way into that being true if they had not won Best Picture. Parasite had not won Best Picture. I would have been very humbled to say, congratulations, 1917, congratulations, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, whatever it may be. But deep down inside, I was like, I'm not saying anything more than that. I'm not saying I think it's going to win definitively. I'm not saying that I'm going to be happy either way definitively. I'm not saying any of it because something inside me said, keep it quiet, keep it still, and it will work out. And when they won original screenplay, I was like, yes, okay, I'm good. And then they won international feature, and I was like, okay, that's the one they were supposed to. Sorry, Pain and Glory, I will celebrate you later. And then he won Best Director, and I went, oh my goodness, what
I thought that was going to happen. I thought he was going to win, and then they were going to split that with 1917 as the Best Picture.
And then when he won, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. When he won Best Director, I kept thinking to myself, okay, are they going to split this? Is that how this is happening? Are they going to split this? This would make sense because he's won the two that everybody was almost 100% sure he's going to win. I was disappointed it didn't win production design, but I'm super happy for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that did.
Yeah.
The art deco of that film is incredible, and they got it right. They made something look like it was a period piece without it making a joke out of it or making a statement out of it. Hard to do in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Really hard to do. Not that film took place over all those times, but those decades are really hard to imitate, and they did it well. So congratulations. And I was happy for Ford versus Ferrari. We'll get to that in a little bit. For film editing, that made sense to me. If it wasn't Parasite, then that would be the one that I wanted to win. So I was like, yeah, okay, so it's not going to be all six of them. Yeah. Okay, they've won a couple, they've lost a couple. Okay, I have to start getting my head around this. And I swear I had an out-of-body experience and Jane Fonda did it right, didn't she? She took the stage.
She held on to it.
She sure did. She did an acting beat. And I was like, that's why you got 2 Oscars and 7 nominations and you're on a successful Netflix show because you held that. And there was something about the way that she kind of like, wasn't a smirk. It was just like a little half moon smile went up. And I went, oh my goodness. And they said it. And I was like, I cannot believe it because it statistically is just breaking the bank all the way down the line. First South Korean, It's
the first South Korean film to be nominated for a Best Picture, period, to be nominated, and then that's wins. Crazy. And it's the first non-English speaking film.
It used to be foreign language, and it is now international. And I think there has to be it's a certain percentage of it has to be in a foreign language in order for it to be considered foreign language films. Because there's a lot of foreign language films that'll flip back and forth in 2 different languages, not necessarily.
Well, The Artist was a French film, but didn't have any technically didn't have any dialogue in it.
Yeah, but it was still words in English, so that's
it was words in English.
Speaking.
Yeah, that's true.
They were mouthing English. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then on top of all of that, not only did it do all of that, which it deserved to do all of that, it won nothing else. It won the SAG and something else. That's it. It didn't win the DGA. It didn't win the BAFTA. It didn't win any of these things that they thought were precursors to the Best Picture. It didn't win film editing, which has usually been an indication. It didn't win any of that stuff. And it ended up being Best Picture. And I think people like you and I, not just you and I, but people like you and I, put that in the world. We put it in the universe. And I think that people in Hollywood are smarter than the world gives them credit for. They get bashed upon and they deserve a lot of it. But when it comes down to great movies, most of the time they get it more right than wrong. And this just tilts it so much further into the category of so right. Yeah. So,
well, I did my part on Sunday before the Oscars. I went out and saw a black and white screening of Parasite. So it's the third time I've seen it in the theater, and it was just as good. It was actually better the third time than it was the first two times. I saw so many other small things, and I think that I'm going to be able to dissect this film, as long as I want to, because it's so meticulously made, and I've learned a lot about it since then. I'm sure we're going to talk about it later on, since this is our top 10 of 2019 episode. It's going to come up again. But so I'm just excited. I'm excited that we have the opportunity to talk about it again. So I'll probably never be bored talking about it. I even talked to a few people today at work that hadn't seen it yet, and I'm like, "Oh, you're in for a treat." Like, I didn't want to say anything about it. They're like, "Oh, is it about, a bug, like a virus or something?" I'm like, no. It doesn't matter what it's about. You just need to see it. Like, I can't tell you anything that's going to make you want to see it more than it won Best Picture. Everybody loves it. Everybody has been just elated coming out of the film. After I came out of the movie this last time, I heard a couple of people just talking as we were walking out. The people in front of me, was a couple in front of me that was walking out, and the guy said to his girlfriend, whatever, wife, whatever, and he's like, I don't know, but that was a pretty effing great movie. And I was like, all right, okay. I mean, that's an understatement in some ways, but
if I've ever heard it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But so let me ask you a couple of real quick questions. Did it being in black and white affect you? I can't even assume that it took anything away from it, first of all, but did it enhance it? Was it worth them doing that?
I think it's supposed to accentuate it. I think that in some ways, I mean, it was at Alamo. Alamo is owned by the same people that own Neon, who's the American distributor of the film. And I wouldn't think that they would just do a slapdash job of a black and white screening. But what I was noticing is there were certain scenes that lent themselves very much to black and white tableau. There were shots that looked amazing in black and white, and having the color not having color didn't detract from those shots. But seeing the film in color, and I think Bong Joon-ho being able to go back and maybe regrade the film, there's things you can do to the film. It was shot digitally. There's things you can do to actually adjust the contrast and adjust I'm speaking in general terms here, but you can make the film look differently in black and white than it does in color. So there's a difference between shooting something in black and white. We'll bring up a film that's on my list that was shot on black and white film later on, and shooting something in black and white and shooting something in color and then taking the color out. So there's ways to adjust those things. And that's why Roma looked so good. Roma was shot it was shot with black and white in mind, whereas Parasite was shot knowing that it was going to be released in color and color graded in that same way, that it was going to be released in color. And I don't know if Bong Joon-ho's had time to go back and regrade Parasite for a black and white showing. But it was an interesting exercise. I think there were certain scenes that looked a little bit more pallid, that didn't pop as much as I knew that they popped when I saw them in the theater in color. So that was a little bit awkward, but the content of the film and the feeling of the film, it didn't detract from that. There were some interesting scenes, not to give too much away, but there's a scene with some hot sauce, and the hot sauce scene was still very effective, even though the red color of the hot sauce didn't show up on screen as red. So there were all kinds of little things. Some of the scenes, there's some there's some scenes with peaches and with fuzz and things like that, and that really shone through the difference between the kind of airborne fuzz of the peach and the background that popped a lot more than I think it did in color. But there was little things that were like better, I think, and things that were worse. But it was really cool though, and I'm interested to see if when it comes out, because I'm guessing they're going to re-release this film. It's already out on Blu-ray if you want to go rent it on Redbox or buy it or whatever. But I just also heard that they're releasing it into 2,000 theaters now, like this weekend. It's getting an expanded release. Oh, they already did. Okay, great. So it's getting an expanded release. So if you want to see it in the theater, which I definitely think you should, it's out there. You can see it pretty much all around the country.
And I think since Monday night or Sunday night, since the Oscars, I think it's made $500,000 more, up 214%. So the Oscar bump exists. Yeah. And so people are, the last thing I want to say, and then we can move on, because yet again, we're having another mini podcast about the Oscars that's really about Parasite. And then we're going to do our top 10, which is really a top 10 about Parasite. But that's besides the point. Spoiler. What's interesting about when people say, what's that film about? Not only it's like a dual personality thing that happens with me. I can't figure out how to explain to anybody what it's about, not because I don't want to give it away. It's because I don't really know even where to begin. I try to break it down to a basic thing. Spoiler alerts. It's family who is not doing well financially, and they cling on to another family who is extremely rich. But that really is not even like really what the film is about. It's much more than that. And then since the clips have been shown at the Oscars, people who haven't seen it are like, well, are there people living in the basement? What's the deal with the basement? What's that thing coming up in the basement? What's going on? And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, it's definitely one of those movies that I could probably spend 2 hours telling you exactly what happens, but I don't think it would hurt your experience because the film is so masterful. So I'm just perplexed. And finally, I just go, it's one of those films you have to experience. There's no way to talk about it unless you have experienced it. And one of my friends said, you keep using the word experience. And I said, well, that's because that's what it is. It's not just, you're not just going to a movie. You're not just seeing a story. There is something going on. And now the world has the biggest accolade in the universe to say, hey, yeah, now I'm not afraid of subtitles. Oh, well, the Oscars said it's okay. And everybody else said, because, the whole story behind Parasite up to this was that it was a foreign language film in subtitles. And I don't go to the movies, not my quote, people's quotes. I don't go to the movies to read. I go to the movies to watch a movie. Mm-hmm. Well, and now, $500,000 later and 214% higher, that's obviously a good thing that people are not going to be inhibited by subtitles. So I want to do the black and white experience. Yeah. But at the same time, I want to get a little distance between myself right now.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't want to see it again anytime. Okay, I'm not saying I won't see it anytime soon. I'm saying my instinct is to just stay away right this second. Just so I...
For me, I mean, seriously, like I have to fight to want to watch other things other than that movie. And I just saw it on Sunday. I saw it 2 days ago. So and that's the other thing is that, you're talking about people like seeing it, not going to the movie theaters to read, but going to movie theaters to watch. I think that especially now, like I've seen it a few times, and I think that it might be a really interesting exercise to actually watch the film with the subtitles turned off. Because as far as content goes, like we both understand what's going on. I know exactly what's going on at any given time, down to like the lines that they're saying back and forth. And a lot of that has to do with the efficiency of the screenplay and the purposefulness of each shot and how there's really nothing else that they could be saying at that moment. If you know the plot line of the film, there's no fat on this film at all. And so that I think I would probably see more. I saw more this time as far as little details are concerned than I did the first two times. And I think it's just going to keep getting that way every single time. So I'm excited. And like I said, I'm going to have to work to not want to just watch this movie every time I see a movie. So Yeah.
and talk about it on every podcast from this moment on.
Well, we're on a streak so far, so we like to keep it going. All right, so let's move on to our top 10. But before we start our yearly countdown of each of our top 10 favorite movies of the year, I wanted to bring up a couple of honorable mentions, and I'm sure you have some too. These honorable mentions are movies that we haven't really talked about on the podcast at all, but they're movies that I did want to bring up that I think are definitely worth watching. And the first one I wanted to talk about, I think I might have brought it up a couple times, is Fighting with My Family. That's the Florence Pugh starring film about WWE wrestling, and her family has like a history of wrestling in England, and she goes over to the United States and tries to become a professional wrestler. And that description is something that I would not be like, I'm going to the theater to see that movie, because I have no interest in wrestling. But what it turns out in being is a great movie it's a movie about family. It's also a sports movie, quote unquote sports movie, and it's very similar to a lot of the boxing movies that I like. I don't watch boxing, but I love boxing movies. So that same kind of a thing. Steph and I, this was early last year, we're looking for a movie to go see, and I just heard a podcast with Stephen Merchant, the director in there, and I was like, you know what, we should try this out. And it turns out it was great. We both loved it and had a great time. And it's Florence Pugh, and this was like pre-Midsommar, other things that I've seen her in, obviously pre Little Women, and then that was just kind of like my first foray into the Florence Pugh universe. So that was pretty cool. But and then another one I'd bring up was Apollo 11. That's a documentary that did not get nominated for an Academy Award, which I thought was insane. But essentially a found footage documentary with no voiceover, very not found footage, quote unquote. It's NASA footage, but it's amazing 70 millimeter cameras were used in the launch of Apollo 11 and throughout the whole filming. And then, so there's archival footage and footage of the crowds and all kinds of stuff. And they intermix all these things. It's masterfully done. And it's definitely a ride, and it's engaging. And it's not a traditional documentary. It's not just people floating heads talking about something that happened 50 years ago. It is engaging, and it was great to see in the theater. The sound was awesome, and it's still going to be, it's still a great rent, I'm sure. And lastly for me is Peanut Butter Falcon, which we've talked about somewhat, I think, but Shia LaBeouf is in it, and it is a heartwarming movie. That's another movie, kind of date movie, that Steph and I saw, and it is it's just a great film, and it's a fun film. And it is, once you see the other films on my list this year, you're going to be like, how can you have these movies, which are dire and somewhat serious and darkly comedic, and then a movie like Peanut Butter Falcon on your list? And I think it comes down to the performance of the lead, Zach Gottsagen, and his interactions with Shia LaBeouf and Dakota Johnson. And it's just great performances and a really cool story, and it's fun. It's also in North Carolina, set in North Carolina, so that's kind of cool. How about you?
So this is what happened. So I had a list of 8, and I was researching for 2 more, and I thought, oh my goodness, I know this has been a great year, but am I now like a movie snob? All of a sudden I can't find 10 great pictures. And then I just went to that list of movies from 2019 that's on the web. And I was like, oh yeah. And then, of course, I found my top 10, but then I had like literally 8 other ones that I was like, I loved all of these movies. I can't even call it honorable mention because there's so many of them. And I know some of them will be on your list. And last year and the couple of years before that, we've done our top 10. If my number 10 is your number 2, then we talk about it when we get to your number 2. So we got to make sure that we're on the same page with that, and everybody understands that's what we're going to do. It's a little confusing for us as well as people who are listening, but if you go with the flow, it makes sense in the long run, because why talk about something and then re-talk about something? Yeah. So that said, Peanut Butter Falcon was on my list of honorable mentions because it's just one of those movies where you can feel the sun, you can feel the water, you can feel the summertime, you can feel them walking Through the High Tide. You can feel it. You can feel that movie. It feels like summertime. And I like buddy movies, and I'm a huge Shia LaBeouf fan, and I think everybody else is superb in the movie. It's just a simple movie, and it tells a simple story, and if you go with it, it's a beautiful ride because the acting is impeccable, like you said. Also, I have The Dead Don't Die. Didn't make my top 10, but I did enjoy it. I know it wasn't one of your favorites of the year, but I did enjoy that Jim Jarmusch film. I think it was funny and clever and witty, and it just hit me in the right way. And when I went back to watch trailers from it and clips from it, I was laughing out loud because I knew what was happening before and after certain scenes. And I started watching Snowpiercer again last night. Go figure. And Tilda Swinton is what is happening? Like, she is just not of this universe. She is not even part of the multi-universe. She just is somewhere else. And the performances that she puts in, especially in The Dead Don't Die, is so just left of center doesn't describe it. Weird doesn't describe it. Odd doesn't describe it. Those are just adjectives that might make somebody comfortable with it if they're watching it, but it's just out of the ordinary. And I love everything about it. She's so subtle in her bold choices that you can't not say, wow, okay, I don't know how you felt about that movie, but she is something to behold in that. And I saw the scene again, spoiler alert for The Dead Don't Die, where Adam Driver and Bill Murray are talking about the actual scene that they're in. And they start to talk about how he didn't know what was happening because he didn't get the rest of the script. And Adam Driver's like, yeah, Jim, meaning Jim Jarmusch, the director and writer. He gave me the whole script. What's wrong with you? Your Academy Award nominee, Bill Murray. What happened? It's just funny. For me, it was funny. And then Under the Silver Lake. Anything with Riley Keough in it is just going to be watchable. And I kept thinking about that movie, and that movie seems to be like it was like 6 years ago, not like at the beginning of the year. It seems a long time ago. It seems like I've thought about that movie for a much longer time than less than a year. I don't know if that's a compliment or a positive thing, but it seems to have crept in, and I can't get it out of my mind. And really, it's sort of a precursor for all of the strange things that came in another movie I'm sure we're going to talk about, because I'm sure it's on your list, Midsommar, which is also in my honorable mentions. Didn't make my top 10. It was there at one point, but then it got knocked out. I kind of feel once I realized that Under the Silver Lake kind of set me in motion for Midsommar, I was a little bit better off with Midsommar than I was after seeing it. That's another movie that people ask me about, and I say it's just something you have cautiously watch that movie. And we can talk about it later, but I was talking about it with a friend of mine, and I was like, and this and that and this and that and this, and then the bear and the burning and the flowers and the smile, blah, 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 blah. And he was like, exactly. I said, what was going on? And then this I thought was going to make my top 10, but for some reason it never went up further than just the honorable mentions. But I still have to say it probably should be there, but the ones that are on my list I'm just solid with. Jojo Rabbit, which I'm sure we're going to talk about later, but for some reason it feels like it should be on my top 10, but I guess maybe because it came to me later, and also everybody who has heard my resistance to it up to this point, I was completely wrong, 100% completely wrong about that film. I don't know why, but I'm not the only one. Ellen said on her show the other day that she had a resistance to it. It wasn't necessarily because of the subject matter. She just had this resistance to it, and it has become one of her favorite movies of all time. And she doesn't say those things lightly. She's legit about her opinions. Yeah. She'll say to somebody, you're going to get an Oscar nomination. And they're like, am I going to win? She's like, yet to be seen. But when, she's like, you're going to get an Oscar nomination and you're going to win. She's been right. So she knows something. Obviously, she's in the business and, she's a smart person. So, I'm sure we're going to talk about it later.
Well, Jojo Rabbit's not on my top 10. It's not in my top 10. I think that movie is there's an amazing performance from Scarlett Johansson in there. And it is that movie is all about tone. And I think Taika Waititi has proven to us time and time again that he's a master of tone. And so I think that's why people were worried about this movie and why they had a resistance to it, possibly you included, is that you weren't sure what kind of tone, like how he was going to manage the tone of such a serious subject and make it comedic, but at the same time, honoring the people and situations, the people that were affected by World War II, by the Nazis, by Hitler, and also making it an engaging and funny and fun story somehow. Hopefully he's proven by now. I mean, he won an Academy Award for the screenplay for it. So hopefully he has proven by now that he's somewhat a master of tone, I would say. I'd say he is a master of tone. But that being said, there are 10 other movies that lit me up even more than that movie did this year. So that's why they're on my list, and it's not. Okay, so are we ready for top 10? Okay. I'll go first. My number 10 is The Lighthouse, directed by Robert Eggers. And I knew this was going to be a crazy movie, and I knew it going into it. I knew it with Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson being involved, considering that Willem Dafoe takes these roles and he just kind of like eats them for breakfast. And Robert Pattinson has been challenging himself over and over and over again. And I don't know if he's trying to kick the Twilight history or what, or if he's just excited to work with these directors and these other actors. But either way, he's making bold choices. And I mean, even being Batman is kind of like a risky thing to do, and it's kind of like swinging the pendulum the other way. But the crazy part is that in 2019 he plays this young, wet behind the ears wannabe lighthouse keeper. And in like a year from now, he's going to be Batman. So it's going to be weird. But this movie's not really about specifically those actors' choices, because from all I've read and all I've seen and seeing this movie in the theater, it's more about the specificity of Robert Eggers and his vision of what happens when you have two guys, stranded in a lighthouse in horrible conditions and having to live with each other and having such a huge power dynamic between them. And it's beautifully shot. It's very confusing. I don't know what happens about half of the film as far as the images that we see, but ultimately it boils down to just the same things happen over and over again. Willem Dafoe handles the lighthouse, and Robert Pattinson handles the foghorn, and they just do that the whole film. But in that, we start seeing a dynamic build between the two, and it's beautifully captured on black and white film. Got an Academy Award nomination for the cinematography. Jaron Blaschke, I think, is his name. And so yeah, I'm gonna revisit it. That's a movie that I probably will have to wait to go back to. I'm gonna have to be in the right headspace for that to really ingest that movie again, because it's a really kind of grimy movie, and it was an experience in the theater, and I loved it. I loved the aspect ratio choices, the harsh lighting, what that film and those lights did to their faces. It made Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson look different than I've ever seen them before. So I don't know. It's a bold choice, and somehow he got a bunch of money to make it. So it's pretty awesome.
Well, the only thing I'll say is that I like what you ended with. Bold choices. I will celebrate bold choices every time, whether or not they work or not. We've talked about this. Talking about The Last Jedi. It's a bold choice to make Princess Leia or General Leia float out into space and then realize she has force awareness and then float back into space. It doesn't work. And could have been the one thing that completely threw me off from the movie, but it didn't, because it's a bold choice. It's a bold way to go about it. I know that's a strange avenue to take to get back to the lighthouse, but I just don't know. I don't know what the lighthouse wants from me. And I'm hoping one day I'm mature enough as a person and as an artist and as a human being to go. I'd like to see it again in like a year in a theater, and maybe through some education on the movie itself. I'm somewhat feel like that's kind of cheating, although I'm all about learning about stuff and then watching it and then I'll know more about it. But I don't know, something about that movie, it just only went so far into me. And then like halfway through when it starts to get really, there's really no adjectives that I like to use that are not off-putting to people. Like, I don't want to say bizarre because that's off-putting to people. I don't want to say weird because that sounds like
Demeaning.
it's a demeaning. Yeah. But it is all of that. So hopefully one day in the future, I'm mature enough to sit down, and I'm thinking it's hopefully way in the future. You know, I hope I'm like that 85-year-old guy who can just zone out on movies and just see every bit of what the art is supposed to be. And when I'm in that phase, I will rewatch The Lighthouse and
A Clockwork Orange.
I don't know about that. I don't know, dude. I got that movie. The point is that I got it.
Gotcha.
The point is I got it. I got everything I needed to get, and I just don't want to be in that world again. That's not true for me for The Lighthouse. So it's a good choice. People loved it, and I think the cinematography Oscar and or film editing Oscar would have been appropriate. So I was happy to see that these actors are doing their thing, and it must be hard for somebody who's a mainstream actor to become something that people are not expecting him to do. And the things he does in that film, well, if that doesn't break people's idea of who this new Batman is, I don't know what will do it, because he does some stuff in The Lighthouse. But okay, so moving on. So my number 10 is Ford versus Ferrari. Is it on your list?
Nope.
Okay, this is a simple top 10 choice for me. It's loud, it's fast, it's character-based. It reminds me of movies that they have made for decades in Hollywood. It's a good old-fashioned story. Not meaning old-fashioned story, meaning that it just reminds me of a different time in Hollywood. I was not expecting to be blown away by it. I was expecting to try to figure out why Christian Bale and Matt Damon haven't been in a film together before. At the same time, it's kind of strange to see them together because they're similar in type, but not. What's happening here? Tracy Letts is a blast in that one sequence, and it won the Oscars it deserved. It won film editing, which we mentioned before, and it really did. It vibrated the chairs in the theater. It had an emotional depth to it that I wasn't expecting. It's just a good movie. And sometimes movies can be a palate cleaner, and you can go see Mary Poppins Returns because you just went and saw Midsommar, or Hereditary or something like that, or The Lighthouse. So you go and see something that Maleficent because your father wants to see it. I think that has more to do with Angelina Jolie, but that's a whole nother subject. So you go see these movies and they're palate cleaners. I think Ford versus Ferrari deserved all of the nominations and accolade talk that it got, and I'm glad that it did because it just works. It's just a really good movie. Enough said.
Yeah, I agree. And I think similar to The Lighthouse, it's somewhat of a two-hander. It's character piece, but it's the characters feeding off of each other, and the characters are necessary for each other to push themselves forward. Less so in The Lighthouse, I guess, but especially in Ford versus Ferrari, they're each necessary for the other person's growth in their field. So that's really cool. Great pick. All right, my number 9 is The Farewell.
Yeah, we got to wait. Yeah.
What's your number 9?
My number 9 is Pain and Glory. Pedro Almodovar's Pain and Glory. And I talked about it when we talked about Antonio Banderas's just beautifully etched out character study. It is an acting tour de force, but it's not like Joker, which, all due respect, Academy Award winner Joaquin Phoenix, that is a balls to the walls character. The character that Antonio Banderas plays in Pain and Glory is just real, simple. And there's two and I know you haven't seen it, there are 2 scenes in it that prove that he deserved to be an Oscar nominee, and Antonio Banderas, that is, and deserved to win the Cannes Film Festival award. It's kind of nice going into Oscar night knowing that if Antonio Banderas doesn't win, he still is a Cannes Film Festival Best Actor. So it's sort of like, okay, I didn't get the Tony, but I got the Pulitzer. Okay, I'm not going to split hairs on that one, you know? And it really is deserving of an audience, because what ends up happening is it's a filmmaker reflecting on parts of his life, reflecting on being a filmmaker, reflecting on rejecting being a filmmaker. And you can tell that it's personal, this movie. This movie is personal. You can tell that he's trying to work through something. And it's just beautiful. It's just really well done. And I'm sure eventually you'll get around to seeing it. And
I'm excited. Yeah.
It's one of those movies that it ends and you go, oh yeah, this is why this is showing up on all these cool people's list. Lots of my friends make top 25 lists, top 10 lists, top 5 lists, and it's been on every one of them, and it deserves to be.
Is Penelope Cruz in it too?
Yeah, she is.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
All right.
She is.
Nice.
Yeah, she
Okay,
is. Cool. It's so, oh my gosh, it's really well done. That's
awesome.
It's heartbreaking, but it's really well done. So I'm excited for you to see that eventually.
Yeah. My number 8 is Us. Is it on your list?
It is not.
Jordan Peele's new film is, I think that I'm glad that he stuck with an original story and didn't try to kind of spin out. I guess he's getting a lot of his kind of like producing juices flowing with Twilight Zone, which came out last year. And then he's also producing some other films. And so I'm excited that he stuck with, for his second directing effort, an original story that still plays with genre, but is also focused in on current events, but then also, you know, his way of representing it's kind of like it's a real world present day allegory, and I love that kind of stuff. And we'll talk about some other versions of that later on in the podcast. I know, but I do love his his way of storytelling, and the performances in this film are great. And we did a whole podcast on it. We talked about performances, and it's hard in this case. I think it's hard to see an actor do what Lupita Nyong'o does and not see the strings. But I think she did something that was kind of amazing, where you kind of forget that she's playing these two different roles, especially opposite herself in a couple scenes. And I think you're able to see different characters on screen when those two different people are on screen, even at the same time. And I'm a pretty cynical person, so I could have seen that go way wrong very quickly, and I hung in there. And I thought that was a lot. There's great performances by Winston Duke, by the two child actors in there too. They're great, and then the somewhat not cameos, but the secondary, tertiary characters of Elizabeth Moss and Tim Heidecker are great too. They're the comedic. Winston Duke's hilarious too in this movie, but the Tim Heidecker and Elizabeth Moss characters are just amazing as comedic reinforcement, I guess. And I kind of expect that from a Jordan Peele film. Even though it's supposed to be a quote unquote horror movie or some sort of like genre based movie, it's still going to have that built in humor. And I felt like it was hitting on all cylinders. The use of music, the score specifically, I think Michael Abels was the composer, and then the use of music, the way that he shaped that, formed that into his own use was awesome. And it's just a great movie. Scary, but also funny. I don't know. It's hard to do, but I think he did it well.
Well, he's pulled it off again. I mean, he made such an impact with Get Out.
Yeah.
What do? Your sophomore effort, it's often told about your sophomore album is always going to be something that it's not because it's your second album. So what do? You lean into it. You do another thriller horror film, even though this was more horror than Get Out, in my opinion.
I think so.
Although there's a lot of horrific things going on in Get Out, but they're more psychologically damaging than it is until the end, of course. But now I think about it, no, they're pretty much both horrors and thrillers.
Yeah.
I think that one day we will look back and say, wait, the year that Renee Zellweger was nominated and Charlize Theron and all those people that were nominated, they were great. But is that the same year Lupita Nyong'o did Us? And people are going to have a hard time with how did she not get nominated? And it might have been a different race, meaning the competitive race of the Oscars. It might have been a different race if she was involved, because it's undeniable what she does. You're exactly right. First of all, she plays against herself, which of course she's not there when she's playing one of the other characters. And so that must be just mind boggling. I can't even imagine it. And everything is so precise. And you're right. You could venture to say these are the type of things where you see the strings being pulled, because almost to be so opposite but the same, you would have to see The Machine, but never. I mean, never. All the way down to the voice, and then the way that her voice is kind of different in an inflection when she's the...
Red is the character that you call it, yeah.
When she's not Red. It's even as she's just the regular person, her voice and tone is just a tad bit different than what she does in normal life. So just on her performance alone, it's something that needs to be mentioned as one of the best of for 2019, because it is mind-blowing what she does in that film. Regardless of how you feel about it, you have to revisit it, because you're just trying to figure out if you can catch it, meaning if it was so good for you that you saw everything, but you're trying to catch to see the flaws now. Like, I think my brain does that accidentally. Or you're trying to make up a deficit that you might not have liked parts of the movie. So you're watching it going, oh, is this going to explain that now? Yeah. And that kind of happened to me. I had a little bit of an issue with one thing in the film. And then the second time I saw it, I was like, okay, well, I can brush that to the side, because everything else just works.
And I think this is also a movie that rewards repeat viewing, because things do click in place a lot more. There's a lot of symmetry in this film that I didn't pick up the first time, and by the second time I was really kind of internalizing that, and I've seen it since then, and it does reward repeat viewing. So yeah, definitely go seek it out. It's an awesome movie. Your number 8
is 1917.
Cool.
I can't stop thinking about it. I enjoyed it. It's not enjoyable is not the word I would use. It was an edge of your seat movie for me. I didn't know anything about the gimmick, or what people are calling a gimmick, the one shot thing. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about the movie at all. So for me, I bought it hook, line, and sinker. There was something very interesting. I mean, it clicked in about 20 minutes in. I was like, is this all one shot? And I was like, that's going to be hard. What are we talking about? Are we talking about running across miles and miles of enemy territory in a war in real time with no cuts? Okay, wait. I'm not sure I've signed up for this. And it just kept going and going and going and going, and it would not stop. And I thought it was beautiful. And I think George McKay, who's the actor who's the lead in it, is impeccable. And unfortunately, my computer is down tonight, so I can't look up the young man's name who is his supporting character, for lack of a better term. I have been searching all over. When we talked about the Oscars, we kept saying Sam Mendes, and I can't find anything to support that. No offense to you. I'm just saying, for me, I'm going to keep saying Sam Mendes, because that's what they said at the Oscars. And so I'm having a hard time, even adjusting, and it's an easy name for me. So I'm going to be able to say it.
They also said Pong Joon-ho.
Yeah, I know. I heard that too.
Yeah.
And I was like, damn it. Can somebody please tell me how to say this guy's name?
I know.
Like, I don't want to get it wrong.
Me either.
What some people were saying, all the way through the Oscars, they were saying Pong. And then some people were saying Bong Joon-ho instead of Joon-ho. And how they were pronouncing the ho was interesting. And we had been in one of our comments on YouTube about Parasite, which is up to about 3,500 views, by the way.
Yeah.
Just saying. They gave us a breakdown of how to say these actors' names, and in particular, Song Gung Ho. And they kept saying Light Ho, Light H-O. And that was the hardest thing, I think, for somebody who speaks English, because everything is at the end. Everything is stressed at the end in our language. Everything is Paul James. It's not, Paul James. It's just not. And so it means no disrespect that I in particular, get these people's names wrong. It's just sometimes it doesn't work. Anyway.
The other actor's name is Dean Charles Chapman.
Yes. Thank you. I believe he was on Game of Thrones. I'm pretty sure he was. Anyway, yeah, if he had been in the movie 10 more minutes, he would have been best supporting actor. He easily could have been a best supporting actor regardless. The categories were so tight this year and so full that it's not a surprise. And this movie came in at the last minute and swept everybody away. So I know it's not one of your favorite movies of the year, but for me, I said it was a masterpiece and I'm sticking to it. There's just something about it that works completely. And I keep watching, because I'm on film Twitter, I keep watching the final sequence where he's running to finally go and talk to Benedict Cumberbatch. And I've seen it being filmed. I've seen the special effects being added. I've seen the production value being changed because of the CGI. I've seen the person on the moped that's riding. I've seen the shot from the air. I've seen it all. And it's still thrilling and exciting regardless, because the most wonderful things happen in that sequence where I would believe most directors would try to make it as pure looking as it could. So they would choreograph it. So he would never run into anybody. He would never jump over everybody, and he runs into people. He gets knocked down. He gets kicked. He gets hit, and it's all 100% real. And not one actor stopped and went, "Oh, sorry," or anything like that. They just went for it. They all went for it. So it was something to behold in the theater to see 1917. So I'm glad it got all of the acclaim that it did, and I'm glad it won all of the awards that it did. And I certainly don't want to spend any time not talking about what it didn't get. But it's a movie to behold, and I'm glad that people are celebrating it because it is very good.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a spectacle, and it was fun to see in the theater. So, yeah, well, that's great. My number 7 is Knives Out. Are we waiting?
We're waiting.
Nice. What's your number 7?
Yeah. Booksmart.
All right, let's talk about it.
Okay, so it's not on yours. I'm surprised. It's not on your list. Oh, okay.
It was on my short list. Seriously, there's Under the Silver Lake, Jojo Rabbit, Booksmart, those are all on my, on my short list. Marriage Story was down there. It's a tough movie, but it was definitely on my short list.
Yeah, we don't have to talk too much about it. We did a whole podcast about it. It's just one of those movies that I have thought about since. Whenever I see a picture of it, whenever I see anybody from it, any actor or actress from it, it just brings it back what a great, fun experience it was. And it could have been, I think, Olivia Wilde, right, is the director.
Yeah.
I think it could have been a completely different movie in somebody else's hands. It could have been a teen comedy. It could have been a Weird Science or one of those John Hughes earlier films. And it sort of is, but it has a sophistication to it because it has a heart to it. We called it Superbad, ironically, because, brother and sister, and meaning Jonah Hill and
Beanie Feldstein.
Beanie, yes, Beanie. She looked great at the Oscars the other night. And when I saw her, I was like, oh, yeah, Booksmart. And then I went, I for whatever reason, couldn't remember. And because the list has been going back and forth for 2 weeks now. And I pulled out the list and I was like, yep, it's still there. I knew it would be. So it's just one of those movies that's just smart and sophisticated. And it's good to know that people are taking this generation, the millennial generation, that people are, or it might be just one couple years under a millennial generation, but they're not taking those young people seriously. And that's got to be irritable to people who are smart and who are taking their life seriously at 16, 17, 18 to 25 years of age, whatever it may be. So I always think when you underestimate people who are younger, and then, Olivia Wilde is not elderly, but she is definitely older than high school age. And she looked great the other night too. When you disrespect young people, it goes back to that David Bowie quote from The Breakfast Club or from the song Changes, and these children that you spit on, they're immune to your consultations. They're quite aware of what they're going through. You cannot disregard a generation because they don't act the way that you think they should act. And Booksmart is one of those films that we are going to look back on and say, nope, they were pretty on point because here's a great representation of them. So,
yeah, no, that's great. All right, my number 6 is Little Women.
We got to wait. But yes, but the good part is that we get to go back to your number 7 because my number 6 is Knives Out.
Oh, nice. All right. So Rian Johnson strikes again, somehow goes from one of the biggest movie productions of all time in Star Wars The Last Jedi to a small, somewhat chamber piece, and with huge cast. And I never knew he was such a big fan of whodunits, but he's obviously a huge fan of Agatha Christie and all these other Poirot type things and other whodunits, to the point where he wrote this out. And it sounds like he wrote it fairly quickly, but just hearing him in interviews and things, it sounded like he had an amazing time preparing this movie and making this movie, and a great time with his cast, which is amazing. And they're going to make another one. So that's exciting too. That at the very least, Daniel Craig's going to be back. I'm guessing that he'll be dealing with some other crazy situation. But yeah, I'm excited to see the next iteration of Benoit Blanc and what they have to say. But as far as this movie goes, I thought that it was well constructed, and I think that it's a smart and knowing film. It understands that the audience, the present day audience, is a little bit different than maybe even the 1970s audience from The Great Train Robbery or Murder on the Orient Express or anything else like that. I think that it's a great exercise in that genre, but it's still current, and audiences nowadays seem to, I'm a part of that. I seem to think like, I know it's going to happen. I've seen enough of these types of things. And we've also kind of like, at least I've kind of grown up on, Law and Orders and these types of somewhat whodunit type things where you can kind of see what's going to happen based on who you're introduced to and all of these other things and all the pieces that are put in place. But I think that Johnson's always one step ahead, and he leaves breadcrumbs, but the breadcrumbs go into the wrong places. It's kind of like Danny in the hedge maze in The Shining, where he's doing these extra steps leading to nowhere, and then we have to, as an audience, kind of back up, and this metaphor's falling apart, and go try to kill him. I don't know, but it's still a fun movie, and I like the interplay between the actors, and he's got some amazing actors putting in small performances, but with a huge amount of excitement. Michael Shannon's great in this film. Toni Collette is great. We can go down the line. You've even spoken about Jamie Lee Curtis and Chris Evans swoops in and takes over certain scenes that he's in, and all that is to be said to bring up Ana de Armas, who I think puts in an awesome performance. And that's the other thing that he kind of like pulled the wool over everybody's eyes. He gave her a starring role in a film that was marketed to with her as some sort of like tertiary character, but she's able to hold the film along with Daniel Craig.
So here's what I'll say about Knives Out. I saw it a second time, and it was in, I think we talked about this during our Oscar podcast, but the point is that I saw it at one of my favorite theaters in a balcony, and it's just conducive to a movie like that. I went with my best friend, and he said that he saw the ending coming, and I was like, that's funny that you say that, because first of all, he loves movies and he's smart, and he can see things that most people don't until the last minute. I said, that's interesting that you said that, because I don't doubt that you did, but I'm seeing it a second time, and I remember kind of what's going to happen, but I couldn't remember exactly how it played out. And when it played out again, I went, oh, that is really clever. I even knew what was happening. And I thought, that's very clever. And the nuances and the small little subtle things that you don't see the very first time, it's an interesting second watch because you're no longer worried about who did it. You're now starting to understand that. And the way that it's structured with the possibility of being anybody in the beginning, which most of those whodunits are like that, but there is a potential to be anybody, even the second time you see it, because it's so well etched out. And the way that he does that kind of, when the characters are being interviewed by Daniel Craig's character, Benoit Blunt. And, what's his last name?
Blanc.
Which, by the way, side note, you did predict that they were going to start a series of these films. That you had asked me at the end of our Knives Out, did I think that this was all encompassing, or did you think that they should make more? And I said I was so satisfied with it, I didn't want to touch anything. And you said, I bet you $1 million they're going to take this one character, this detective, and they're going to move him on to other things. And sure enough, that's exactly what they're going to do.
Yep.
So congratulations. But yeah, it's just one of those movies that you watch and it keeps you engaged in it on an entertainment level. It's got some substance to it. Don't get me wrong. They're talking about some heavy political issues. And the last time that I saw it, every time they mentioned where she was from, everybody laughed from the very beginning on.
That's great.
And yeah, every single time. So there's something about the clarity about how Rian Johnson wrote it, and it became his Academy Award nominated original screenplay. And in any other year, I would have said I thought it should have won. And any other year, it probably would have won because it's just clever and smart and sophisticated, and the characters are extremely etched out. And it goes back to the point that I've said before about there are no small parts, only small actors. Toni Collette doesn't do a whole lot in this film, meaning screen time. Jamie Lee Curtis doesn't have a lot of screen time. Don Johnson has as much screen time as anybody else, but they really do put it in. Like you really believe they are 360 degrees worth of a human being. You really do. So, yeah.
All right. My number 5 is